Morning, Ruben.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Holy, how you holding up?
Good. It's busier than ever.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to be tapering off at all.
No. I thought that I might be able to focus more on some things that I'm doing, but it's just endless calls and questions and this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, another thing.
I wanted to ask you how on the social capital, well, I guess when you make your presentation, I'll find out, but I wanted to see how you did the social capital part for your presentation today.
Oh, okay. So we used two questions, one on trust.
Right.
And then the others where they're predicting, or they're basically saying who they would go to in certain situations. I just use an example with one of them.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to use those for some of the cluster analysis. And for that, we're creating continuous variables.
Okay. And on the acculturation, did you use all 21 items, or
we used, I think it's 12 items or 16 items, but yes, we basically aggregated the three different groups.
Okay, because there's 21. There's 5, 11, and 5 in the scales. One scale is 5, one scale is 11, one scale is 5. So 21 items.
That doesn't sound right. Let me look here. That sounds more like the community. What do we call it? I think that's the other one.
One of them, the first batch of 5 asks about how often you use English and Spanish. The second batch of 11 asks how often you watch TV, I think, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a mix of them, but so we'll have to do some runs to see how those 3 different scales correlate with each other.
So let me see here.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Enjoying the lovely day.
Where are you? Are you in Missouri?
No, I'm in Northwest Iowa.
Oh, okay. Is it raining?
No, it's lovely.
Oh, you really mean that then?
Yeah,
it's raining over here. I'm in Michigan.
Really mean it. Yeah, everybody's out in the field.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was out walking the dogs, so yeah, it's all good.
How's everybody feeling about opening up those meat plants and making people go to work?
I guess what's the lesser of the evils, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think as long as they provide safety protections and all that stuff for the workers, and I don't know that they're doing it all.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
There's a concern, I guess, about that.
Yeah.
Could be. I'm not that. I mean, I just hear it on the news.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Hi, Morris. Hi, Mark.
Hello. Morris Brown, how are you? I'm doing great.
Good.
They let anybody on these Zooms, huh?
Just old timers, Morris.
Do either of you know if Extension here at MSU is doing anything with protections for farm workers?
No, we're not. To my knowledge, we're just on it in the ag branch. I mean, we've published, but it hasn't been a big effort.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. People were asking me, and I said, I don't think so.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we've put a couple of guide sheets together in Missouri. Had a couple of them translated into Spanish, but for the most part, there hasn't been a lot done here either.
it's just not our expertise.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing.
You need somebody from human medicine to write those, not a person that knows how to plant corn.
So we have a.
I'll probably have that same problem here in about 20 minutes. When my dog wakes up.
Anytime anything moves outside, she goes nuts.
Oh my gosh. I have my grandson's puppy, and I was against having a puppy, but of course we had to get this puppy. And now I'm the one that's the caretaker all day long when I'm trying to work, and he's driving me nuts.
Hi, Jan. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Victor.
Who's got the young scholar?
We're the youthful voices.
Good morning, Jan.
Good morning.
We'll go ahead and give people just a couple more minutes to get on, and then we'll get started.
Glad you could make it, Cheryl.
Yeah, I haven't seen you for a long time, Jan. How are you?
Okay.
You're looking just the same.
I guess hunkering down must be good for me, huh?
There you go. I don't know. I think I've hunkered down just about long enough.
Yeah.
I know what it's gonna be.
Dr. Martinez.
Yes.
I didn't get that slide set you said you sent to me.
Oh, you didn't? I'll send them after our meeting today.
I'm sorry.
I'll send them after the meeting today.
Okay.
That was the slides from last meeting, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'll send them out this afternoon. I thought you had, maybe I sent you an email without the attachment.
All right, excellent.
Okay, sorry.
I just actually
Yeah, I thought
posted a link to all the materials from the last session in the chat file.
Okay, we'll send that out as well. So Stephen has added all that material from the different places and so on at a link over at Mizzou.
Yeah,
So I'll send that out.
we have a web page for the research project, and it has the video, the Zoom session, and then the 3 presentations. Well, it's a few minutes after 11. Let's go ahead and get started. My name's Steve Jeanetta. I'm the Education Director for Community Development Extension in Missouri, and I'm the Director of the Columbia Center here. And I've been working with Ruben Martinez at Michigan State and Julian Samora Research Institute and Flora-Iowa for the last 4 years on this project. It's called the Latino Agriculture Entrepreneurship Project. And this is the second of 3 webinars we've planned that kind of this one is exploring a little bit greater depth in some of the data that we've been developing over as part of the project. The first one, we kind of presented some findings from our focus group sessions and from our household survey. This one, we want to take a little more time to get your perceptions on particularly that first session, and then also explore greater depth some of the findings from the survey work. Which will lead into then the webinar next week, or in 2 weeks, sorry, on the 14th at this same time. It'll be a Thursday as well, where we're going to start sharing some of the tools we developed out of this research. That really our charge was to create some it's like an assessment tool sort of for helping providers figure out where farmers are in their Latino farmers are in their development as farmers, and so it's easier to target the resources you have to the needs that they might have. So to get started, we want to just have everybody introduce themselves again, like we did last time. And this time, if you were part of the session last time, maybe when you introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, but also then maybe something that resonated for you from that first workshop that we had. If you weren't participating in that first workshop, then maybe something that you'd like us to explore while we're discussing things this morning. Before we do that, maybe though we should have Ruben and Jan introduce themselves. Ruben?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ruben Martinez. I'm the director of the Julian Samora Research Institute here at Michigan State University and also a professor of sociology. I've been responsible for the work that this project has been doing over here in Michigan. So my presentation today and the presentation last time was on the Michigan part of it. Great to have you on board.
I'm Jan Flora, and I'm professor emeritus in sociology at Iowa State, and currently a research professor at Kansas State University ad honorem. And I'm working with Cornelia Flora on the project principally on farm workers in northwest Iowa, and specifically in Sioux County, Iowa. Glad everybody could be here this morning.
I would just add that Corinne Valdivia is also working on the project here in Missouri, and she's going to join us as soon as she gets done with a class.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay, great.
Sorry.
Introduce yourself a little bit, Corinne.
Class went well. It went a little bit over, but not that bad. I'm Corinne Valdivia. I'm a professor of Ag and Applied Economics in the Division of Applied Social Sciences, and also a member of Cambio Center and part of the team of this research and other research that we've done with Latinos in Missouri in particular. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, if you could just introduce yourselves and then share something that you thought resonated with you out of that first presentation. And if you weren't there for that, then maybe something you'd be interested in exploring with us this morning. Anybody want to go first?
I'm Mark Longstroth, work in Southwest Michigan, mainly with blueberry growers. And what impressed me the most was how similar all our experiences were. Working with these diverse populations, even though they had different types of farms they were putting together. And I keep turning off my video because my connection's unstable. So
Okay.
So I'll continue because I'm from Michigan too. Mark, I like your profile picture, so it's okay if you turn off your video. I am also an extension educator with Michigan State University. My name is Florencia Colella. I was born and raised in Argentina. And I work in farm business management in West Central Michigan. And I am just starting to be a part of— Bluetooth connected. Sorry about that. I am just starting to be a part of this project, and what impacted me most of last meeting was just how much I admire some of the people in this call, and getting to see what you are all doing and getting to be a part of it has me really excited. So
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Keeping with the Michigan theme, I'm Chris Peterson here at MSU, Emeritus Professor of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics. Also founding director of the MSU Product Center that works with entrepreneurs. Again, like Mark, I was really struck with the similarities of these populations in all three states. And although there wasn't a lot on entrepreneurship, it strikes me that from a perspective of business training generally, there would be a pretty common set of needs.
I'm also from Michigan, so I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariel Borgman. I'm an extension educator in our community food systems team. I'm based out of Southwest Michigan and work with Latino farmers mostly in the farm food safety capacity. So interested just in learning as much as I can and be able to better serve folks in our region. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, I guess it's on me. I'm Morris Brown, and I live in Southeast Michigan. I'm retired county extension director and I'm a retired consultant. So I guess I'm retired and retired. So, I don't know what else to tell you. I've spent a lot of time working with agriculture. My whole career was in agriculture as a planner, and as an administrator, as a part of the MSU Extension Program, director. And then I retired and became a consultant for about 17 years. So, and I just retired again from that a couple of years ago.
Thank you.
I can introduce myself. I'm maybe an outlier. I'm neither from Michigan, nor am I in the agricultural field. I'm a professor at Dordt University here in Sioux Center, which is in Sioux County, where I understand Jan Flora's research is being conducted. I'm also on the CASA board, and so a couple of years ago, Jan came and spoke to our board, and I was very fascinated with the research, so I'm here to learn more. I'm also conducting research with the Latino community here in Sioux County, as I'm working on my dissertation currently. And the whole capital framework is fascinating to me. I'm exploring barriers that Latino families face as they seek to engage with our local schools. So my field is education, but I see a lot of parallels between this research and what I'm exploring in my research as well.
Great, thank you.
I'll go ahead and continue the Iowa representation. My name is Fred Hall, and I'm the Extension Dairy Specialist in Northwest Iowa, located in Sioux County. I had worked with Jan on the survey that he did almost 2 years ago up here. We have done several labor programs, and I guess I was struck where I had missed the focus of entrepreneurial development in the extension vein to train. We've had 2 grants that were utilized to do Spanish education, bilingual education. The first one a year ago was on calf feeding and colostrum management. This year we will do udder health and parlor hygiene, and those actual trainings will be in November. That's it.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay, a commonality.
What's that? I was going to say.
Oh. This is Reagan. I've got a terrible delay in my audio. I'm Reagan from Southwest Missouri, and I work with dairy farmers, and so I find it exciting to follow Fred. And I also would echo his sentiments that I found it interesting that the need for Spanish training in the animal side of things, that was a high need, and that was my big takeaway from the last meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Reagan.
Oh, hello. This is Victor Ayervides. I'm with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach with Community and Economic Development and Farm Food and Enterprise Development. I was invited by Jan Flora to participate in this. And the first session was what impacted me was the similarity of what you have found in your studies and research in regard to the Latino entrepreneurs and the similarity with the Latino entrepreneurs that I am working with in retail businesses.
Oh, okay.
And also, all of this information is going to be very useful because we are partnering with Practical Farmers of Iowa in reaching out to Latinos in regard to the topic of farming.
Thank you, Victor.
I think I may be last. I am Maria Rodriguez Alcala, and I work for University of Missouri Extension. And I participated in the first part of this project. Chris Peterson, I think I know you from my previous life with co-ops. I worked in a geek-on with my cook in the past.
Okay, I haven't gone yet. Cheryl Hieronymus, and I'm the Regional Extension Director up here in Northwest Iowa. But I lived my whole life in this county and have watched it change as agriculture became bigger and our demographics have changed a lot, as you can imagine. So this topic is of particular interest to me from a personal side, but also from a professional side. I served as the county director in Sioux County for, probably 15 years or so. And during that time, Chris Mondak and I piloted an immigration focus group series that we held one summer where we brought community partners together along with some of our Latino neighbors. And that was an exceptionally interesting experience, just trying to deal with some of the issues, what makes it hard for them to integrate in the communities, what are their challenges in the schools and the churches and the government and so on. So it's a topic that's close to my heart, but since I've left my county director role, it's haven't been as involved in it, just haven't had that opportunity. So thank you, Jan, for including me.
Cheryl, Corinne and I did about 8 or 9 years worth of research on community integration in Missouri as well.
Hi, everyone. Jessica Claypole. I'm with the USDA Farm Service Agency. I work in Missouri out of our state office. And for those of you that don't know, I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with our agency, but we administer farm programs to farmers and ranchers. So my role in the state level is public affairs and outreach. So we have been involved with this project. I personally was not involved with it as I wasn't in my current position at that time, but a lot of our county office staff, as well as state office staff were, and so we're just looking forward to, obviously continuing the conversation and the work to better serve this community and reach, our underserved audiences. So looking forward to the discussion and learning more. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jessica. And we had have we had a chance to have everybody introduce themselves?
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Celise Christie. I work at Practical Farmers of Iowa as the Next Generation Program Coordinator. Jan invited me and thankful to participate today. I was also on the last call a few weeks ago and was just really excited to hear about the data that's presented and the future conversations. But I think one main takeaway for me was in talking about all of the capitals, really talking about developing like this pathway or potential pipeline from farm worker to farmer, especially in Iowa. And that's really of interest to us at Practical Farmers of Iowa to, bring folks under our network in terms of training and in terms of really engaging in a farmer to farmer network and education. And so I'm excited to learn more. And we are also, as Victor mentioned, partnering with other local partners and partners in Nebraska to potentially, develop our programming in that area. We are planning to host 2 field days this summer, and primarily in Spanish and 100% Spanish, specifically highlighting poultry production and vegetable production in greenhouses. And those will be hosted virtually on Facebook Live. So hopefully, I'll make sure to share that information with everyone so that you all can join in. I'm sure, I don't want to assume everybody has a Facebook, but you're able to join in if you can. So thanks.
Thank you, Celise.
Steve, I wanted to mention something because many of you are doing work in something that we've been doing work a lot. So we've been working also on entrepreneurship, not only on Latino workers and family integration, but as well as an entrepreneurship. And we have faculty at Cambio Center that have been working also in education. So making sure that we can continue to make those connections, I think it's important.
Yeah, as well as family development and a variety of other things. There's a lot of interesting perspectives on some of these integration issues.
There is also Montserrat Iñiguez. She's from the Latino Outreach Contractor for Practical Farmers of Iowa, and her microphone is not working, but she's saying hello.
Welcome, Montserrat. So has everybody had a chance to introduce themselves? I think we're pretty close if we haven't. It's just about everybody.
So how many of us is supposed to be on this team?
Oh, okay.
How many are you expecting, Steve?
Oh, we didn't require an RSVP, so. Welcome everybody, and then part of what we wanted to do today then was see if there were any specific questions or issues that came out of the presentations last week that you wanted to follow up on a little bit more. We didn't really give ourselves much time at the end to do that, and so we just wanted to take a few minutes today before we get into the new material to follow up and make sure that people were able to kind of get their questions answered or their comments out there about, the profile data that we shared last week, or last time, I guess it was 2 weeks ago. One comment was the point about one-one contact. Yeah, the connecting to people at individual level. There are, and we'll see in some of the data we discussed today, there are some, some ties between trust and being able to access some of these resources and have some success at that. Yeah, and face-to-face relationship building is real important. And that's going to be challenging right now because we're not really allowed to do much of that. But hopefully, as things improve with this pandemic, that we'll be able to get out and connect to people again that way. The challenge is also that the trust level still has to be there in order for that to happen.
That's a critical feature of working with Latino communities is that it's a traditional culture that's emphasizes personal touch, personal communications, and so forth, which is, one of the things that I brought up last time, that it's not a task-oriented culture in the same way that Western cultures are. So this thing of face-to-face relationship building is critical for working with Latino communities, particularly the more traditional ones, the ones that may be less acculturated.
Mm-hmm. And which we tend to see in higher numbers in some of these rural communities as well. Are there any other comments or questions that kind of people had coming out of that last one? I know sometimes when you get away from it a little bit and you have a chance to think about some things, stuff will come up.
And if you're not hearing questions, some of them are coming through the chat box. So that's particularly Montserrat, who apparently is has a mic that's not working.
Yeah. Well, we can go ahead and oh, let's see. Gosh, Mary, do you know which of the 3 presentations you're referring to?
I'm looking at the farm workers in Northwest Iowa, and
Okay.
there's a slide on human capital, and the question is, how well do you handle English? And yeah, I was just wondering if, how big of a sample size are these findings based off of? And is this kind of unique to the field of agriculture, or is this, Latinos in general as far as how well they handle English?
Unmuted. I think that probably the issues, and those people who are on from Sioux County can comment, but it seems to me that the issues around English proficiency are probably greater in Sioux County and the surrounding counties, because as I'll show in my slideshow from today, a lot of people are undocumented. And so even though they have been here for a while, many of them don't speak English because that undocumented status makes it more difficult and more concerning to them to interact very much with the larger community. But I'd welcome other people's comments on that.
Yeah, I would add that there's no such thing as Latinos in general, because the population is so heterogeneous, very heterogeneous population, not only in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of native-born and foreign-born. And so I would venture to say that many of the ones in our study are foreign-born, so it would pertain mostly to immigrants.
So one of the things that we found, this is Corinne, in Missouri when we were doing household surveys, and this is in the first and second wave, so 450 families and then 330 families. We were looking at acculturation pathways as well as proficiency in language, and one of the measures of acculturation was about language. And what you find is that there is at least 30% of the group that's bicultural, very well acculturated both in English and in Spanish. But then there is a group that's basically not well acculturated in English, not bicultural in that sense, but still has strong ties, and it has been in the US for a long time. It's been able to develop social capital networks, but it's mainly Spanish-speaking networks. So we found that. And those that tend to be more entrepreneurs, we also found that some of them were English networks and the others were only Spanish networks. So there was entrepreneurship and increases in income, but depending on the level of acculturation, they develop their niches in one or the other language.
One thing that I might be interested in, and maybe you talked about this last time, I'm sorry I missed the last one, but have we done any studies on access to health care, particularly dental care? I hear a lot of discussion about that. In our office in Sioux County, I am right across the hall with someone who works as a dental hygienist, and she talks quite a bit about lack of access and lack of dollars to help immigrant, especially children, get the kind of dental care that they need.
This is Morris Brown. I missed the last session, but a good part of my career was spent on the farms doing one-on-one contacts, and as an African American, going into communities that were not predominantly African American. Matter of fact, about 98% Caucasian. Over 20 plus years, and then when I retired, another 17 years working with Hispanics and with African American farmers, I found no replacement for one-on-one contacts. A lot of time, especially today, we want to do things electronically, but in absence of having had some one-on-one contact, I think it's almost futile to build a relationship. And of course, the language piece comes in there as well, but especially dealing with people who speak other languages other than English. But I just wanted to add that I saw several comments about the importance of one-on-one contacts. And actually, I find that not just a contact, but the on-farm contacts, I think, is invaluable.
So
I'm getting to health. We did not include healthcare or healthcare issues in this study, but there are numerous studies that have been done on healthcare issues among Latinos. And Maria Rodriguez says that she did one there in Missouri. Basically, you know, the rule of thumb is that this is one of the most unconnected group to any of our core institutions, and there is tremendous health disparity in not only in terms of treatment, but in terms of access to care and insurance and so on.
I think one thing I would add to that, thank you, Ruben, is the healthcare access and accessing insurance is one of the main reasons farmers in general do not leave their full-time job to farm. And that can also apply to Latinos and other minorities, even in a more in a more important way. But many Latinos that are working full-time, even if they have access to insurance through their jobs, they can't still afford it because it really depends on what your income is, if you can afford that subsidized insurance, because we live in a employer-based system in the US, basically.
And dental care access, particularly in rural areas, is really, really difficult. Particularly if you don't have insurance, a lot of those practices don't, it's much harder to get service even if you have some resources if you're not insured for dental work. So it is really, it can be pretty complicated.
So I have a thought just based on my own experience. It's not research based, but as a native Spanish speaker and somebody that's part of the millennial generation, I have noticed in my experience is that Latinos are not necessarily, it's not just a matter of speaking the language, or visiting the farm, but it's, in my opinion, more of a matter of spending the time. I think achieving that connection is 100% a matter of the time spent with the farmer. In my opinion, it can be done over the phone or over Zoom, or over WhatsApp. That's a tool that we Latinos use a lot. And even if it's done in English, I don't think they mind as much. But I think the problem here, somebody talked about how goal-oriented American culture is and how that's not the case in Latino culture. I think many times Latino culture is seen here as that people waste their time just spending time with each other. And so I think that that is the one thing that really could change the approach of things.
Thank you.
I would just add that the acculturation issues, which is not restricted to language, it applies to the agricultural resources as well as the healthcare. And those are kind of similar in terms of what I've seen in the two projects.
I wanted to add that I had a student who did a very interesting, oh, I'm Cornelia Flora. I'm part of Jan's team. I did a study on healthcare, but this was in Marshall County, of new immigrants or people who had been there for a while. And she found something very interesting, that if someone was sick, you were more likely to use your cell phone and call back to Mexico or even Guatemala to talk to the abuelita about what to do rather than go to a doctor. Again, that's the piece that you're all bringing out, which is trust. But that was, to me, I was absolutely amazed about that. But that shows the importance of those international social linkages and the fact that, you know, they found that when they went to a gringo doctor, they were generally not respected. They weren't listened to. I mean, they just didn't feel that it was helpful or that they could tell about what was going on. This was particularly with their children, but themselves as well.
Yeah.
So I have an example of, in this coronavirus situation, my husband moved here in December. So he's been here for 5 months. And he is connecting with, he has downloaded an app, like an Argentinian app on his phone, and he's paying for the service in Argentina that allows him to connect online with a doctor over there. And we do also go to the doctor here, but it doesn't seem like, and we have health care, but he doesn't seem to feel like that's enough. Mm-hmm. He needs that connection with an Argentinian person. And we actually do have an Argentinian doctor here, that we are so lucky to have a doctor from our same country in our town. But even with all that, he also needs the connection with a doctor over there.
So Steve, one thing we found in our case here in Missouri was that the acculturation, of course, and that connection is extremely critical for Latinos, but also we found that when they do have insurance and they start understanding the system, they start relying more on the doctors they trust here. So cost is an issue also. It's not just the acculturation, it's both. Mm-hmm.
I might add that I was on a Zoom call a couple of days ago that dealt with Brazil, and it was interesting. Brazil and the COVID-19 question, and Brazil and the U.S. have rather similar governmental structures, so there was some discussion about similarities and differences. And one of the differences between the two countries is that Brazil has developed a national health system that reaches into most rural communities. It's deteriorated in the last 2 or 3 years somewhat, but I think the whole question of access to health and dental care is a big issue, and particularly big for those folks who either are undocumented, or even those who have green cards and have been here for less than 5 years, because they're not eligible for a lot of the programs that citizens can avail themselves of.
Anybody else? Well, with that, we'll kind of get into our second round of presentations, and they'll be shorter than last time, right? More roughly like about 10 minutes for each one. And where we're gonna, we'll all be doing somewhat different things. And I'll start things off with a presentation on, oh shoot, let me see if I can make this thing work. Let's see. So what we did was, is that showing up on the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what we've been working on for really the last couple months is exploring experiences of these farmers, trying to group them into somewhat.
Steve,
Oh,
you
yes.
want to put it in presentation mode.
Oh, it's not in presentation mode, is it? Okay. So one of the things we've been working on is looking at grouping these farmers in ways that help us better understand different kinds of experiences that they're having as farmers. And we developed 4 groups, and mostly this is using some of the economic indicators we have in our group. The first one were identified, they identified themselves with agriculture as their primary economic activity and or as full-time farmers from one of the head of the households. Were kind of the questions that we pulled those 2 groups together out of. This was a smaller sample of about 9 or 10 farmers. The second group is farmers with sales between $5,000 and $10,000, and the third group then is farmers with sales of less than $5,000, and the last one is Latinos engaged in agriculture with no reported sales. And so what we wanted to do was see if there's really any differences between these 4 groups. If there are, what do each, where are those? Are they important to their development as farmers? And we're kind of still getting into some of this work, but what we wanted to do now was kind of show you what we've been learning in terms about what the profile might look like for each one of these farmers, or each one of these groups of farmers. The first one is we had some questions on goals, where they we had a list of goals, potential goals there, and then they would rank them. And so we pulled together what their top 4 goals were for their farming, but then also their top 4 goals or 4 reasons for farming. And so in terms of the reasons for farming, this group would, the top one was it's a way to earn money. It's an escape from my tedious job. They want to produce healthy organic food for their family, or cut on household expenses. And so, their top goals then, there's really increasing revenue, expanding their acreage income during retirement, and then producing new products. And so you can see that their goals tend to be much more, or tend to be quite correlated to the, their work as a business. They average age is 10 years, 49 years, and then their education is at 5 years of education, which is relatively low, but our sample is pretty small, so we're going to have to get into that a little bit We're deeply overall the sample. About half of the farmers in our overall sample were ninth grade education or below. And so this group might be overrepresented in that, at least at this point. And so then we have an acculturation index. And so what the acculturation index does is it's based on language use, language proficiency, and use in the engagement with the media. And so it really kind of, to what extent are they comfortable in those three areas in English, and to what extent they're comfortable in those three areas in Spanish. And so the more acculturated they are, the more they're comfortable in both languages. And so for this particular group, they scored a 2.2 on the scale, which is 1 to 4, which is relatively acculturated. So they're somewhat comfortable in both English and in Spanish. Corinne, correct me if I'm getting that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how we're interpreting it. And then engagement in economic enterprise. So they had generally crop sales of $10,000 and livestock sales of $109,000 a year.
Steve?
Yes.
In the acculturation, it's only showing the Anglo acculturation, not in the Spanish acculturation index. They're pretty high. 2.2 is it's good acculturation, and it's only measuring the English side. It's
just
not measuring both.
Okay.
And then in terms of education, one of the things that we're still looking at is we actually ignore education in this particular case, because I think in the process of analyzing the data, there was a mistake. We know that the levels are higher, and it may be that they calculate, in the calculations, we used the coding index and not the actual number of years. So ignore that part.
Okay. Yes, and so when we look at their economic engagement, they're still relatively modest, but their investments in farming, as you'll see, is much higher, and their sales are much higher than the other other three groups. So the second group, they're engaged in the practice of farming, mostly part-time, and they're generating some revenue from it, between $5,000 and $10,000. Their top reasons for farming is they want to dedicate themselves to the farm when they retire. They want a rural lifestyle for their family, and it's a way of earning additional income. And so you can see it contrasts a little bit from the first group. It's not as economic oriented in terms of their reasons for doing it. But when you look at their goals, they want to expand their farming acreage, increase revenue, acquire new equipment, and generate income during retirement. It's a little bit younger group, 45 years, and have a little bit more education. And so, and when you look at this particular group, their English proficiency is 3 out of 4, which is relatively high, a higher rate of acculturation. And then this group isn't selling crops, but they are selling some livestock, and their investment in farming is high. And so they're still kind of more in a growth mode rather than in terms of generating income.
I have a quick question about this group.
Sure.
Do you know, did you all collect, you said engage in the practice of farming, like how long they are and where they are? Are they like 1 to 3 years in, 3 to 7, or 7 plus?
We do have that information, but we haven't broken it out by these particular groups yet, or at least not that I can remember. Corinne, do you recall?
No, we haven't done that right now, but this is an opportunity also to ask you all, what are the additional data that we can basically show for each one of these profiles? We have the data, we just chose these as a short way of presenting them, but we can really dig deeper based on what you guys are interested in.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I think initially being clear between farmer and farm worker, and then if someone is a farmer, what does that mean? If that, are they like a new farmer, or are they like, you know, they've started their business and they're in the business for 1 to 3 years, or are they established midway and like, you know, 3 to 5, or are they, you know, really well established, you know, 7 years off? Just to gauge, like, you know, engage in the practice of farming, but, you know, you never know for how long. And I think some context is important. I think also acreages. So you said the top 4 goals, expand my farm acreage. You know, well, what are they starting with? Are they starting with, you know, 10 to 20, 20 to 40 acres or more? And like, if they want to expand, how much do they want to expand by? I think that that's essential to know. And then I'm curious, like, you know, I think you mentioned, Stephen, also, you know, they're making 5 to 10,000. So that's assuming that that's all from their farm operation, you know, and how being able to say like, okay, what percentage, and then even equating that percentage to dollar signs is farm income versus like off-farm income, to then equate.
Oh, we have that data too.
We have all that data. The what we're sharing here is just their sales. So that's not even really, so it was interesting because when we were doing a lot of the data collections, and the folks that were interviewing the farmers were basically saying, I don't know how they do this because they're really not making any money in this. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to how they're thinking about this as you look at these groups, it's more of an investment over time.
Right.
Yeah, but I think the points you're making are really key, because one of the things that we want to know is what is useful information for you when looking at the farmers, because we do have all that type of information. So these are really good points.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then also just a quick question: when you say generate income during retirement, this is retirement from their off-farm job, correct? And then
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Off-farm job. Yeah, in the future.
Gotcha. Okay.
I had another question. It says sale of livestock is 19,000, almost 20,000, but in the heading it says 5 to 10,000 income from farming. Is that 5 to 10,000 their net income?
Yeah. So I assume so, because we have it's reported in a couple of different places, the particular income, and so this 5 to 10,000 was in one place where they're basically talking about the money they're earning from farming, and here the sales of livestock and sales of crops was generated from a series of questions in terms of what they're growing, how they're growing it, what they're selling, and what they're using for their family, and those kinds of things. And so this is where that number is taken from. So yeah, it is more in terms of net income from farming in that first line, and this is sales, so it's not necessarily net income.
So the data was collected by oral discussion and not a review of farm records?
Exactly. Data was collected by interviewing a household survey with the farmers. Yeah, one of the challenges too is through other projects we've done is particularly a lot of these smaller farmers, their farm records are not great either, and part of their development in entrepreneurs is really starting to think about it more in terms of their business side of things. So this is the third group, and their top 4 reasons for farming, and they're a little bit smaller. they're quite a bit smaller. And it connects them to their childhood, an escape from their tedious job, and it's a way to earn money. Their top 4 goals are to earn revenue, generate income during retirement, expand their farm acreage, and then pass it on to their children. They are less acculturated. They're about 46 average age. And then you can see they do have some sales crops, and they do have some livestock sales, but it's much smaller. And then their investments in farming too is smaller. We see some, particularly in terms of investments, some significant differences between the second and third groups.
Also, a quick question: are these sales of crops and sales of livestock within a year?
Yes, yeah, they went basically that last year.
Okay. And then investments in farming, is that their own money that they're reinvesting, or are they getting external?
We do have data on whether they're getting loans and stuff, but it is their own investments, and this is their farm investment. We also have data as it relates to their non-farm investments too, but we want to kind of just focus in on what they're investing in farming.
Is the investment predominantly in land, or is it in equipment? Did you collect that?
We do have that. We do have it broken down. We put this in an aggregate right now. I don't recall by looking at it whether land is the principal investment, but I expect for this group it would be. In some of the other stuff we've been looking at, the investments and particularly in land were more important to the second, third, and fourth group than it was to the first group.
Do you have information also that might show what their household income would be, and the size of their families? Because it seems like the numbers that we're looking at doesn't give a complete picture of what we're looking at.
No, what we were just focusing on the farming enterprise. And so when they're generating less than $5,000 a year in their farming, so it's not an important income generator for them at this point. But we do have household income, and we do have family size as well.
And some of the case studies of the focus groups that were presented earlier actually speak to that the fact that for many of these groups, this is like the second operation that they do after work.
Yeah.
So it's not different from the first group. The second and third group are thinking more of doing it on the side, and sometimes not even for trying to sell at this moment, but for their own consumption as well.
Yeah, some of the motivations we heard in the focus groups were particularly oriented towards providing healthier foods for their families. So then the fourth group is a group that isn't reporting any income in this. And their top reasons is, the reasons don't seem to change that much, but the order does. And so for them, this group, it's an escape from their tedious job. Farming is a tradition in their family. It's a way to earn money, and it also connects them to their childhoods. Their top 4 goals are generating income during retirement, passing the farm on to their children, increasing revenue, and expanding their farm acreage. And the Acculturation Index, they're really it's group 1, 3, and 4 are all very close to the same. They operate okay in English. And then engagement, there are no crop sales. There are some sales of livestock, and their investment in farming is really similar to group 3. So these are where we are with the 4 groups that we've worked with. We also did a couple of things in terms of looking at the relationship with the resource providers. This is, we had a set of questions where they could rate basically tell us the level of trust they had in each of the organizations. They included NRCS, FSA, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, which is a Missouri group, Missouri Department of Agriculture, Extension, and Ag Lenders. And you'll see that in groups 1, 2, and 3, they all have fairly high levels of trust in all 3 groups, and they probably have a little more interaction with those groups and agencies as well. It's when you get to group 4 where we see quite a bit of difference in that regard in terms of the trust levels being down. Now, on the Extension ranks very high across those, but Extension played a role in our collecting of this data and some of those things too. So that they may have that might be a little bit outsized given the size of our samples. But
it may also be that they have less contact.
That's true. And then so the second one we were looking at is really kind of trying to get a sense of what their social connections were. And so we have a series of questions, and I'm just showing one of them here, about where they would go, who they would go to for assistance in certain situations. And what we're showing here is if you're purchasing land, who are you going to go to for assistance in terms of buying land? And so they ranked each of these from 1 to 5, or 1 to 4. And you can see, you know, the family's important. Church, not so important for buying land or co-workers. But they do, you know, and there are some differences, particularly in terms of farm organization, but in government support program. But the most important one is the family, and so in this you can see where that could be an issue in terms of being able to you know, being able to have a broad enough network to really kind of identify what you want or what you need and are looking for.
And,
yeah.
You know, another way to look at this is really looking at it with the experience and contact that they have, and the need to figure out mechanisms or ways of building these relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And who are the groups on this list that you would think about connecting to, or if you were out there looking for land, and you know, who are the ones that would be the most useful to that kind of an enterprise, and to what extent are they doing that, and how do we help them build some bridges to those resources? And so that's the time we have for our part of it. Let's get to Michigan, I think. Ruben, you're next?
Okay, let me open up my slides. So the data I'm going to be reporting on are from 70 survey respondents. That's how many we were able to interview here in Michigan. And basically the way that we sought them out was to look at the number that were across the different counties and try to locate them in those counties so that we could get as representative a sample as possible. That, of course, does not mean that it's a representative sample. It really means that those are the people who were willing to, one, that we could find, and secondly, that they were willing to participate in the study. Last time I presented some data on the focus groups and so forth. So in terms of main reasons for farming by two types of farmers, those who are farming for family and friends and those who are commercially oriented farmers. The reasons for those farming for family is that the reason that they gave was the number one was farming as a tradition in the family. It's a way to earn money, and they want to own their own business. The commercially oriented farmers want to increase revenue, they want to generate income during retirement, and they want to purchase new equipment. So slightly different reasons, primary reasons for engaging in agriculture. The least selected reasons, and what we gave them was the list of reasons, and then they were able to identify which ones related to them or resonated with them the most. Those who were farming for family and friends did not say that it was an escape from the tedious job. They did not say very much that they wanted to cut on household expenses and that they wanted to they were doing it for a rural lifestyle of the family. The commercially oriented farmers did not generally emphasize producing new products. They did not emphasize purchasing their own farm. My sense was that they already have some ownership of farm, and they were not that much interested in expanding the facilities that they had. So in terms of the characteristics, I broke them out a little bit differently than the Missouri group. So I broke them out in terms of full-time farmers, part-time with more than 5K in sales, those with part-time with less than 5K in sales, and the distribution was pretty much even across the groups, the three groups, for those who responded, except for the ones with less than 5K, but it's a good number in terms of the number that participated. The mean age, you will see the full-time farmers are 54 years of age on average. The part-timers with more than 5K were 50, so they're the youngest of the three groups. And then the part-timers with less than 5K, they're the oldest, they're almost 59 years old. The average for the three groups was 57.6. So they're, if you look at the average American farmer, they're slightly younger, particularly those who are 50 years of age, and certainly the ones in Missouri are much younger. So basically across the Missouri and Michigan, Michigan has more established farmers, although in the sample we have a considerable number of immigrants, and they're slightly older than the Missouri group. In terms of education, like the group over in Missouri, the majority or most of them have less than a 9th grade education. You can see that that's the modal group for the full-time farmers. And then the part-time farmers with making more than 5K, they're kind of evenly distributed across the different categories of educational level. And the ones who are part-timers, who are the oldest group, are more concentrated in having less than an 8th grade education. So this group is the one that I think not only is the youngest, but seems to have a higher proportion of educated folks, and probably the ones that most of you will be working with in the future. Latino farmer motivations and goals. By these different groups, farming is a tradition. That was 18 of them, or 42%, compared to 38% and 19% across the other types, or what I'm calling farmer status. It's a way to earn money. This is fairly evenly distributed. Usually when we're making comparisons in terms of percentages, differences of 10% or more are generally considered significant or important to look at. For instance, 42 and 38 is not that much of a difference. If we were to do a representative sample and so on, it probably wouldn't show up significant. But the 42 and the 19, I think that would imply that there's a real difference out there. It's a way to earn money. The full-timers, of course, want to emphasize that. a little bit more, a little bit less rather by the part-timers with more than 5K, and the same with those with less than 5K. Goals overall, what is it they want to do with their farms? Full-time farmers are interested in increasing their revenue, and they want to generate income during retirement. Part-timers with greater than 5K, they also want to generate revenue as the other group, and they all want to generate some income following retirement. So these are the goals that they're working with. And I know that Chris had asked me what are their goals. Well, we're getting a little bit of an insight into what it is that they're wanting to do. Investments and value of products by Latino farmer status. The full-time farmers, average amounts of investments were at about 65K. That's a considerable amount. Those who are part-time with greater than 5K were at 13. And interestingly enough, the older group, which is making less than 5K, is at about 20,000. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but they're obviously investing a little bit more than the other group. You know, there's a sizable investment over here, and I think Steve showed that they had also some sizable investments over there. In terms of sales value of the crops, the full-time farmers responded with 53K, part-timers with more than 5K at 12.7, and those with less than 5K at about 2.5, which makes perfectly good sense. You will note that the folks over in Missouri are much more livestock oriented, much more meat oriented and so forth. The group here in Michigan is much more crop, particularly fruits, berries, and so on. The sales in meats and dairy are very little, particularly among the full-time farmers and the part-time farmers making less than 5K. The share of income, there was a question on this from Source by Latino Farmer Status. These are averages in terms of the percentages. So the full-time farmers are saying that their share of income is from the farm is at 82%, which is, you know, what we would expect. I don't know on average what farmers of, you know, relatively small scale, that is, you know, 10 to 20 acres, I don't know what they generate in terms of income relative to the percentage, but this is what they're saying. The part-timers, of course, are a little bit less. Those with more than 5K are saying it's about a quarter of their income, and those with less than 5K saying it's, you know, very little. In terms of average from non-farming, there's almost 20, well, it's actually 28.4%, although the number is very low. The part-timers with more than 5K, you know, 3/4 of their income comes from some other source, non-farming. They have jobs, they're doing this part-time. And the same thing with the part-timers who are making less than 5K from their farms. Culturation levels, they're all pretty much the same. They're at 2.75, 2.59, 2.6, which really says that, you know, on a scale from 1 to 4, they're right about the middle, leaning a little bit to the positive side, but obviously they're not neither assimilated. And, you know, I would say that a 3 would indicate that they're pretty far along in terms of the acculturation or their capacity to function in both cultures. These are functioning in both cultures, but it's hard to say just how much. So in terms of a summary, you know, what we have is a mix of family tradition, increasing revenues and business ownership are main reasons for farming. Many want to supplement retirement income. They're all in their 50s or higher. Part-time farmers with greater than 5K farming income are the youngest, followed by full-time farmers and those earning 5K, less than 5K. Most do not have a high school diploma, and most have substantial investments in accordance with their particular status, with part-timers with less than 5K, making more proportionately, I think, if you will, than part-timers with more than 5K. Most are in crop production with few in meat and dairy product production. The share of income from farming is related to farmer status, full-time versus part-time, and the acculturation levels are similar across the groups, with all averaging some time, you know, some point between sometimes using English to often doing so. So they're able to function, but when we get into the written aspect of it, because of the low level of education that they have, I think that we have much more a greater set of barriers that need to be looked at in terms of literacy and so forth, in order to be able to work with the kinds of agencies from the USDA and so forth, to be able to navigate the kinds of requirements that they have for getting loans or getting assistance and so forth. So I'll leave that there and ask Jan Flora to step up and make a few comments. What's happening in Iowa?
Okay. For some reason, I'm not sharing the screen, am I? Am I? Oh, okay, good. It just doesn't show it. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to look at a little bit into the demographics, look at people's reasons to farm, a little bit more about financial capital of farm workers than we did last time. And then if there's time, I wanted to just say a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and its relationship to rural Iowans. I am here comparing comparing Steve's data in Missouri with that of the farm workers in Iowa. And as you can see, they're at least a decade younger than the farmers, which you would expect. In terms of migratory status and education, if we look at education, the educational level of farm workers is somewhat lower than for Latino farmers, but there's a recent phenomenon among dairy farmers. You'll notice number 6 there, completed undergraduate. So they are hiring bachelor level veterinarians, not so much to provide vet services to the animals, but rather to supervise the other Latino employees. And one dairy is hiring veterinarian graduates from Chapingo in Mexico for that purpose, and La Molina in Peru as well. Then if we look at migratory status, the most important thing is that few farm workers are US citizens. There are some green card holders and somewhat more temporary residents, which would be people who have DACA and TPS, both of which are presently under threat. The majority, however, numbers 5 and 6, are other status or preferred not to answer. So that is an informal way of guessing, at least, that about half of the folks are undocumented. So that, as I was suggesting earlier, that has important implications for a lot of things that happen within the community. Since these are farm workers and very few of them are actually doing farming, we only ask the question of, would you like to farm and what are the reasons for that? And so basically, I divided them into 2 groups, and the next step will be to correlate those 2 groups. The first are those that do it for community and lifestyle reasons, similar to the friends and family categories that Ruben used. And I'm not sure about I would like to farm when I retire, because I noticed that in Missouri and Michigan, that one was sometimes an indicator of of commercial farming. So we'll do some more work on that. But you can see the categories that look like they're probably related to more commercial farming. Now, I just wanted to look at financial capital. The majority of folks are saving money for specific goals that they have. And in addition to that, they're sending remittances to family members in another country. Smaller number are active in obtaining loans. And as we found the previous time, those who are most likely to have obtained loans in the last 5 years do it through the formal sector in a sense. You might say that employers are informal, but the employer has a similar kind of relationship to them as a bank in terms of being fairly sure that they're going to repay it. And the purpose of seeking their loans have a lot to do with investments, either non-ag or agricultural investments, or purchase of vehicle. And the modal category in terms of number of vehicles per household is 2. So it's clear that vehicles are very important for the family making the business trips, essentially going to work that they need to do. But there are also important reasons, family and personal reasons for obtaining loans and emergency expenses. And my guess is that those emergency expenses, number 5 here, probably have a lot to do with health issues, as we were discussing earlier. So we couldn't ask all of the same kinds of questions that those people who are actually farming were asked, but we did ask, what would you do if you wanted to start your own, where would you go if you wanted to start your own business? And basically, the most frequent answers are essentially bonding social capital, a friend, a relative, a fellow worker, and then ranking number 4 would be a bank, which would be bridging. And then the others are of less importance. I just wanted to say a little bit about the COVID-19 because I think that's going to have an impact on how we think about the next phases that we'll be discussing in a couple of weeks. And some of the things that Iowa, of course, if we're looking at meat packing, is sort of the cradle of the modern meat packing industry, which began in Denison, Iowa in 1960 with the opening of an IBP boxed beef plant. All of this was essentially involved descaling at the grocery store level and also within the meat packing plant. And lower wages were one of the results of this. The movement of the meat packing plants from urban areas to rural areas broke the power of the labor unions. So although we have labor unions in Iowa in the meat packing plants, they just don't have very much clout. Now, some people say, well, you know, it was the Latinos that pushed the local workers, the Anglo workers, out of the meat packing plants. So we did a little examination of county business patterns and found that in Marshall County, Iowa, which has a large meat packing plant, the wages, the actual wages are statewide data, and then the number of Latinos is just for Marshall County, and you can see that the wage levels reached their low in about the late 90s, and the increase in Latino population of Marshall County only began to rise sometime around that time in the 90s, and really took off after 2000. So it's clear that that the traditional workers did not want to work under the conditions that resulted in particularly the lower wages that there were beginning in the late 80s, or beginning in the 80s, I should say. So how does that relate to COVID-19? Well, we see that the meat packers were very slow to apply measures to slow the spread of COVID-19. In Waterloo, for instance, it was clear that it was spreading at least a week before the governor decided to close the plant. So we're finding that in terms of deaths from COVID-19, it hits the Latino population very heavily. 6%, they're 6% of the population, but 22% of the deaths. And we see in the press that there's much more concern for the CAFO operators and the hogs, chickens, and possibly fat cattle who might be slaughtered than there is for the workers in those plants. And the politicians simply took the word of the meat packers that they had the situation under control. So going back to Sioux County then, it has a different kind of situation. There are small specialty packing plants, and then of course there are lots of farm workers and there are Latinos who also work in small manufacturing plants, largely related to agriculture. And so far, Sioux County has been spared a large number of cases. They only have 8, and then no deaths have been reported. So that's a good side of the story. So I think I'll stop there, and I think we're probably over time, but maybe we can have some questions.
Jan, do you have any Sioux County data similar to the Marshall County data where you track the population change against the wages?
Fred, the wages aren't available for meatpacking plants at the county level, so it would be the same. It would be the same curve, which is the state level curve. And basically the Sioux County, let me see if I can pull it back up here. The Sioux County, do I have it there? No, I don't have the right one. There we go. In Sioux County, you would have a similar kind of curve, I think, because most of the Latinos who came to Sioux County came after the year 2000. It was actually maybe a decade or so later than occurred in many of the meatpacking towns. So I think one would have something rather similar to what you see here.
Okay, thank you.
Jan, are you including meat processing workers as part of your sample?
No, we did not. But I included it simply because these are some of the issues that we're facing right now. And as we think about how we use our data, I think it's important to take into account the COVID-19 situation. and particularly the degree to which Latinos feel threatened by COVID-19 and basically have been abandoned by politicians.
That trend that you showed for your county, Jan, Georgian Arts did a research for many microregions, and she showed actually that Latinos weren't driving down the salaries. That was already and that had already happened.
Yeah, right, exactly. Am I out of the sharing now, or do you still have that? Have the screen?
I think Steve was sharing the closing slide.
Yeah, I just put up the slide that it had the information for the last session.
You want to put it back up there, Steve?
Sure. Oh, I thought Jan wanted to share something. Okay.
Again, one of the things that's really key for us is figuring out, as you are already doing, sharing the type of information that's useful for your work as well. Mm-hmm. That's the whole purpose of this.
Could you repeat the question?
Well, I know we're out of time, so we'll take a little time at the beginning of the session next time as well to take a few questions and discuss a little bit some of the findings we have here. But the bulk of the time we really want to kind of get into some of the tools we're working on and get your perspectives on those and whether you see them as being useful and how we might be able to adapt them to make them more useful to the work that you're doing. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Think of some questions you would like to see on the instrument.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adios.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Mm-hmm.